السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نحمده ونصلي على رسول النبي الكريم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. آمين. قال الله تعالى في شان حبيبي إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا مولانا محمد طب القلوب ودوائها وعافية الأبدان وشفائها ونور الأبصار وضيائها وعلى آله وصحبه دائما أبدا. صلاة وسلام عليك يا سيدي يا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Continuing with what we've been talking about, which again are basically, this is kind of the history leading up to Karbala. Last week we were talking about the Khilafah of Sayyidina Ali, Karamallah Wajh. And as I said, we were at the point where he was martyred. And the plan to martyr him was literally, it's not just figure of speech, literally made in the shade of the Kaaba. Abdul Rahman ibn Muljim and the other group that he was with, which were Khawarij, they went to Hajj and they were sitting in the shade of the Kaaba making the plan on how to kill Ali radiallahu anhu. And the plan was a simultaneous attack on Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu in Kufa, Amir Muawiyah radiallahu anhu in Sham, and Amr bin al-As radiallahu anhu in Egypt. So same day after Fajr, or actually before Fajr time. And as I mentioned, the weapon that he struck Ali radiallahu anhu with was engulfed in poison. And so when he struck Sayyidina Ali Karamallah Wajh, on his head, and Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had told him that this would become wet from this, meaning the blood from your forehead will wet your beard. It cracked his skull. The poison was severe enough that, extreme enough that various other people that were cut by the weapon died immediately. Ali radiallahu anhu, the attack took place on the 19th of Ramadan. Ali radiallahu anhu did not pass until the 21st of Ramadan. This again is the strength of Ali that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him. He is the conqueror of Khaybar. And so, and in between he's talking to everybody as well, giving advice and telling them what they need to be doing. And Abdul Rahman ibn Muljim, when he was captured, they tied him toward the feet of Sayyidina Ali. Ali said that he's thirsty, bring him something to drink. So they brought him something to drink. This is, again, the character of Ali. That this is the man who just struck him, pointing to kill him. And he's telling him, look, he's thirsty, give him something to drink. So they brought him some water and some sharbat to drink, and he threw it away. And Ali, he says to him, he said that if you had drank it, you would have been my guest. And I would have pleaded your case in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment. Eventually Ali passes. He's martyred. He is born in the house of Allah. He was born in the Kaaba, and he is martyred in the house of Allah, in the masjid in Kufa. When he passes away, they bury him secretly. And there are only 3 people at his burial, because the fear was that if they buried him openly, where everybody knew where his grave was, then the Khawarij would come and dig him up and mutilate his body. So the characteristics of the Khawarij have not changed over time. If you look at, this was their intention with Ali, and this is why they buried him secretly. Only 3 people at his burial. his sons, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and one other son. They did the same thing, they did this, they had the intention of doing it with Ali. They did this to Imam Zayd bin Ali. After he was martyred, they dug up his grave and crucified him, mutilated his body. Same thing, if you look at what a few years ago they did in Pakistan. They came and they dug up the mazar, or the graves of various awliyaullah, and they mutilated them. They did the same thing in Iraq, where they desecrated the grave of Yunus alayhi salam and various companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All in the name of protecting Tawheed. The names change of the various groups, the faces change, but the activities remain the same, because the ideology is the same. If you look at the ideology of ISIS, the ideology of the Wahhabis, the basic ideology of the modern day Deobandis, it's the same. The root of it is the same. And you trace it back, and it goes back to the Khawarij during that time. After Sayyidina Ali, Karamallah, again, he is martyred in Ramadan, year 40 Hijri. Rasulullah SAW said that the Khilafah will be for 30 years. After which will come the age of kings, the cruel monarchy. After which will be the age of tyrants, which is what we're living in today. Because the monarchy ended with the Ottomans. And after the tyrants will come Imam Mahdi and Isa alayhi salam. So if you count from the passing of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to the martyrdom of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, you get 29 and a half years. So it's not 30 years. So after Ali radiallahu anhu's martyrdom, Imam Hassan, his son alayhi salam, is selected as the Khalifa. This is one of the things that, unfortunately Imam Hassan alayhi salam, he's abused both by the Sunnis and the Shia. No one wants to mention him. We talk about Khulfa Rashideen, everybody mentions Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali radiallahu anhum. They forget Imam Hassan alayhi salam. Because without him, you don't have the completion of the Khilafah. One important point to note here is that him being the son of Sayyidina Ali, this is not kingship. Ali didn't say that he is my heir. The Shura sat and they chose Imam Hassan as the Khalifa. Sometimes people, live in the shadows of others, so no one notices them. And this is also the case of Imam Hassan alayhi salam. When Rasulullah SAW passed, he was 7 years old. He lived his level of knowledge even at that point is something that can't be matched by any scholar today. Actually can't even be matched by all of the scholars combined today, even at that age. And there are various stories, but I'm not going to go into those right now, about his knowledge at that age. And then he lives in the shadow of his father. Ali radhiyallahu, he cast a big shadow. This is Ali, Babul Madinatul Ilm, Mawla Kainat. So now, he is not only the leader of the household of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he is also the leader of all of the Muslims. He is Khalifa of all of the believers. And one important point also to understand here is there are two forms of Khilafah. You have the apparent Khilafah, which is what we see. And the first among these is Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu. And then you have the hidden Khilafah, Batniya, which the leader among them is Sayyidina Ali, Karamallahu wajh. And to understand the difference in the two, you have to read Surah Kahf, the story of Musa al-Islam and Khizr al-Islam. But again, as I said before, I'm skipping over a lot of stuff. And I'm going to continue to skip over a lot of stuff. There are a lot of details that I'm not mentioning right now, and maybe perhaps later, inshallah, if we have time, we'll come back to them. So Imam Hassan al-Islam becomes the Khalifa. He continues what his father was doing. And the last thing that Ali radhiyallahu anhu was doing before he was martyred was that he was gathering an army again to go and deal with the situation in Sham, to unite the Ummah under one flag again. Because again, it's been split now. And you have Sham under Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, and then you have the rest of the Ummah. And so Imam Hassan al-Islam, he continues this task. He gathers an army, a massive army, and eventually he heads towards Sham. And when Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, he sees this army coming, he turns to Umar bin al-As, and the hadith is in Sahih Muslim. This isn't something from some obscure history book. Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, he asks Umar, he says that if we fight, what will happen? He says there will be much bloodshed, meaning we will lose a lot of lives. Because when he saw this army coming, he knew that his army could not withstand that army. So he says, then I want to make some agreement at any cost. So he sends 2 men from Quraysh to Imam Hassan al-Islam. And he's giving him a blank sheet of paper and say, you write your requirements or your conditions, and I will agree to them, but I want the rule. Imam Hassan al-Islam did not want the rule. Again, he knew that Rasulullah ﷺ has said that the Khilafah is for 30 years. So he was not going to be the leader one day beyond 30 years, or give up the leadership one day before 30 years. And the reason he wasn't going to go past that point was he didn't want to be part of a system that was not 100% sanctioned by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he says, fine, I have certain conditions. And he laid out 5 conditions. Condition number 1 was that you will rule according to the Quran and the Sunnah. And so Muawiyah radiallahu anhu says, I agree. The last condition was that you will not name an heir apparent to your rule. So after your rule, or after your death, then the Ummah will decide who they want as their leader. And he agreed to this as well. The other 3 conditions, one was that the cursing of Sayyidina Ali as part of the Jummah khutbah must stop. This became commonplace among those who opposed Ali radiallahu anhu. That part of the khutbah was to abuse him in various forms. Saying his name or referring to him in derogatory manner. To the extent that later in Banu Umayyah, if an imam did not do that, he did not remain in his position. Either he was removed or killed. So he said, this must stop. So Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, he says, I cannot speak for anybody else, but I can speak only for myself. So even upon this, Imam Hassan al-Islam says, fine. Another condition was that your rulers or your governors, your appointees will have no authority over the household of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they cannot tell us to do anything, which is an important point to understand, because there are many people who say, oh, see, Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein Islam, they made bay'ah with Muawiyah radiallahu anhu. They did not make bay'ah with Muawiyah radiallahu anhu. And if you look at the conditions, and if you understand what bay'ah is, you understand that it's actually Muawiyah trying to give bay'ah to Imam Hassan alayhi salam, because he's the one who's laying out the conditions, and Muawiyah radiallahu anhu is the one who is agreeing to the conditions. Just like, when the teacher, the student comes and gives bay'ah to the teacher is the one saying that, do you promise to do this? Do you promise to fast, regularly? Do you promise to make your 5 daily salat? Do you promise to do all of these things? And the student is the one saying, yes, I promise, yes, I promise, yes, I promise. So again, here, Imam Hassan is the one laying out the conditions, and Muawiyah is the one who is agreeing to the conditions. So he says that none of your appointees have any authority over us. If they want us to go and fight, they have to ask us. They can't order us. So he agrees. And he says, and then the other thing was that you cannot take any retaliation against the Shia Ali. And here it's important to understand, Shia in Arabic doesn't mean like Shia today, like we understand the meaning. Shia simply means a group or party of. And so at that time, anyone who supported Ali was referred to as Shia Ali. And anyone who supported Muawiyah was referred to as Shia Muawiyah. So as you cannot do anything, you cannot take any retaliation against those who have supported my father or myself. They have an amnesty against any retaliation. So he agreed. So once the agreement was signed, then Imam Hassan al-Islam handed over the rule, completing those 30 years that his grandfather had mentioned before. And so now begins the monarchy. And Muawiyah is really the transition into the monarchy, but he is the first of the monarchs. After this, actually people that were within the army of Imam Hassan al-Islam became upset with him signing over things, and so they attack Imam Hassan al-Islam, and he has to be rescued. But an important point here also to understand, and especially, I was reading something someone had written, they were saying, Muawiyah's great gift to the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was that he created peace within the ummah, which goes totally opposite against what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. One day when Imam Hassan was young, of course he was young during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he walks into the masjid, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he sees him, he's giving the khutbah, and he leaves the khutbah, and he comes and he picks him up and he places him beside himself. And he looks at him and he looks at the people, and he looks at him and he looks at the people, and again these hadiths are in Sahih Muslim, and then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says to the people, he says that this son of mine, Imam Hassan al-Islam, this son of mine, he is the master of men. He is the Sayyid of mankind. He is the master of men. And because of him, two large groups will reconcile. And there will be peace within the ummah. It's one thing if Imam Hassan al-Islam had handed over the rule from underneath, meaning that he was overwhelmed, that he felt cornered. Anybody can do that. Generals generally do that when when they see they can't win, they just hand over everything. It's something totally different when you have the upper hand and you have the ability to annihilate your enemy. But because of your concern for the ummah of Rasul, of your grandfather, the ummah of Rasulullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you say, fine, I don't want this anymore. And this is the character of Imam Hassan, who is also amongst the leader of the youth of Jannah, he along with his brother. After all of this, eventually Imam Hassan Islam, he comes back to Medina Munawwara. And so the household of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, they are living in Medina Munawwara. This signing and handing over the rule is Rabiul Awwal, year 41 Hijri. They come back, and people think in people's mind, this concept of, oh, they lived in peace. This isn't a world of peace. At least not our understanding of peace, or superficial understanding of peace, that, oh, you're just relaxed and don't have to worry about anything, and that's it. Happily ever after. This Disney version of what they've driven into our minds, that, oh, happily ever after. You just relax and don't have to worry about anything. That's not peace. The Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam referred to this dunya as Darul Huzn, the world of difficulties. Because the enemy is constantly attacking us, one way or the other. Constant barrage, never-ending barrage. And if we don't fight back, if we don't defend ourselves, then we become overwhelmed by the system. And in actuality, we become part of the system. And today, the system is what? It's the system of Dajjal. Everywhere, throughout the world. Doesn't matter where you go, that's the system. And it used to be they would hide the system. Now it's just plain out open in front of everybody to see. I mean, they're not even shy about it. You go even to Makkah. You look at the cleaning crew. If you look at their suits, or the vest that they wear, it has the Dajjal's eye on it. Look at it. The police, Saudi police badge. What is it? It's the eye of Dajjal, the one eye. Surrounded by palm trees. But the eye is clearly there. And we think we're at peace. There's no peace, not in that sense. For a Muslim, peace is the pleasure of Allah and His Messenger. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. This is peace. So it's a constant struggle to maintain that peace. Because in order to maintain that peace, you have to constantly be fighting against those who are against Allah and His Messenger. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Which again is the whole system today. Doesn't matter whether it's a so-called Muslim country or a non-Muslim country, they're all the same. So even when Imam Hassan al-Islam, he returns to Medina Munawwara, it's not peace in that sense of happily ever after and don't have to worry about anything. He's teaching us that constant struggle. And if you start reading, about the issues that they had to deal with, even after all of these things were signed, Marwan bin Hakam, who eventually became the governor of Medina Munawwara, the hypocrite. But simply because of blood relations, he ends up in this position. And various other people within the administration, making things as hard as they can. Trying to make them compromise in any way they can. Because if you compromise your values, then you've already lost the battle. When someone dies in this path, he doesn't lose. He actually wins. The defeat comes when you become like your enemy. You compromise your values and now you become the enemy. That is defeat. And when you look at the household of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there is no defeat. They never compromise the values. So even with all of the difficulties, they remain firm in their position. Now what's going on in Sham, if you read the history, Muawiyah radhiyallahu anhu had various sons, one of whose name was Yazid. Yazid's mother was Christian. When Yazid was 3 or 4 years old, Muawiyah radhiyallahu anhu had an issue with Yazid's mother. So she left and left with her son back to her tribe of Banu Kalb. And so Yazid grows up amongst the Christians, which was important to understand, because then you understand some of the things he mentioned or says later on. Politicians have no religion. Same thing back then, same thing today. If you look at the Khalifa and the Khilafah, they're not politicians in that sense, not in the modern day sense. Politicians are driven by power and money, whether they're kings as politicians or they're anybody else as politicians. Muawiyah radhiyallahu anhu, initially wanted nothing to do with this son. If you look again, various narrations, he had stern dislike for this son. However, situations changed. Yazid also puts on a good facade, and eventually he's allowed back in. And he also realizes that the one thing that stands between him and becoming the ruler after his father, or the one person who stands between him and becoming the ruler after his father, is Imam Hassan alayhi salam. Because even though Imam Hassan alayhi salam didn't want anything to do with the rule, for the same reason I mentioned before, everybody had this feeling, and it was the opinion of everybody, that after Muawiyah, rule would come back to Imam Hassan alayhi salam. And so Yazid, when shaitan is your leader, various plots come to your mind. And so he bribes one of the wives of Imam Hassan alayhi salam, Jawda bin Ashaf, whose father was very treacherous as well. That if you poison him and you kill him, then I will make you my queen. And so, year 50 Hijri, Imam Hassan alayhi salam is poisoned. And this becomes obvious, from the effects. He's 47 years old at that time. And eventually he passes from the poisoning. When she goes to Sham to gain her position, then, and she comes before Muawiyah, he kicks her out. She went before the wrong person. She should have gone to Yazid. But at the same time, this is happening, and I'm going to stop here today. We'll continue from here next week, inshallah. Basically, because Muawiyah radhiyallahu anhu is going to be the ruler for 19 years. The year 60 Hijri is when he will pass. When the attack occurred upon Sayyidina Ali radhiyallahu anhu, they also attacked, as I mentioned, Muawiyah radhiyallahu anhu, but the attack upon him was not fatal. And in Egypt, Amr bin al-As radhiyallahu anhu was sick that day, so he didn't come for Fajr. And so the imam that was there leading the salat in his place was martyred. But again, as I said, we'll continue from here next week. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us understand, fill our hearts with His love and the love of His beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his family, his companions, and all of those whom they love, inshallah. Those who have not made sunnah, go ahead and make sunnah, inshallah.